Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Welcome back, everyone. Laszlo Montgomery back with you again. Thanks for finding some time to listen to the China History Podcast. We're knee-deep in the history of Chinese philosophy. Last episode, we studied Laozi. And today, without further ado, let's not waste one more moment of time and get straight to Zhuangzi. His book, the Zhuangzi, is sometimes referred to as the second book of the Dao. The Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi are the two core books that make up the earliest works of Daoism. For Lao Zhuang Daoism, these are the holiest of holies. We closed last episode explaining the two different schools of Daoism, Lao Zhuang and Huang Lao. Huang for Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor. Zhuangzi lived around 369 to 286 BCE. And this puts him smack dab in the middle of the Warring States period. He was born Zhuangzhou. Zhou was his given name, as the story goes. He came from Song State, present-day Anhui Province, from the town of Mengcheng. Although Confucius was born in Lu State in Shandong, his ancestry went back to Song State. We know about Zhuangzi the same way we know about Laozi from Sima Qian's Shi Ji, or Records of the Grand Historian. Sima Qian said that Zhuangzi worked in a so-called lacquer garden, but there's no explanation as to exactly what a lacquer garden was. Zhuangzi completely rejected a life in government, despite his renown as a respected wise man of letters. Zhuangzi was a younger contemporary of Mengzi, although neither one mentions the other in their work. Confucius had already been gone for a century by the time Zhuangzi came along. So you can see, although Daoism got the initial head start, it wasn't by much, and what happens is these two philosophies and religions, Daoism and Confucianism, sort of grow up and evolve in China side by side, century after century. Each in their own time became political forces at the highest levels of power. Sometimes the two political rivals, the Confucianists and Daoists, sometimes they got along, and sometimes they didn't. The great work that Zhuangzi is credited with writing, or at least partially writing, had a total of 33 chapters broken down into 3 parts. It's the first part, the first 7 chapters, that are specifically credited to Master Zhuang. These are known as the inner chapters, the Nei Pian. The next 15 are known as the outer chapters, the Wai Pian, and the balance 11 are known as the mixed chapters. It's said Zhuangzi himself wrote the inner chapters. His disciples wrote the outer chapters, and the mixed chapters were written by various others. Scholars generally agree the inner chapters, the first 7, were written by a single person. Whether or not it was Zhuangzi's own brushstrokes that wrote the original is still open for debate. Like just about everything from these ancient days, who knows? As with the Dao De Jing and the I Ching, you don't have to read the Zhuangzi in any particular order. It's a mishmash of wisdom, and you could pick it up and read random passages of stories and sayings, and maybe it speaks to you, maybe it doesn't. It's certainly quite relatable, if you're open-minded. The various chapters more or less fall into one of 3 categories. The first involves stories where Zhuangzi spars verbally with his sidekick, Hui Shi, a noted sophist of his day. You have these Abbott and Costello-type debates between Hui Shi and Zhuangzi, where Zhuangzi turns logic on its head. There are also stories that exhibit Zhuangzi's contempt and disdain for government of all kinds, or they concern themselves with matters of death as part of the universal process. Here's one of my favorites. Hui Shi and Zhuangzi were out taking a stroll, and just as they came to a little bridge that ran over a stream, they paused. Zhuangzi sighed and uttered, Outswim the minnows so free and easy. This is the happiness of fish. Hui Shi replied, You're not a fish. Whence do you know the happiness of fish? Zhuangzi replied, Well, you are not me. Whence do you know I don't know the happiness of fish? Hui Shi replied, Granted that I am not you. I don't know about you. Then granted that you are not a fish. The case for your not knowing the happiness of fish is complete. Zhuangzi replied, Let's trace back to the root of the issue. When you said, Whence do you know the fish are happy? You asked me already knowing I knew it. So it was a lot of stuff like this, very witty and sometimes downright hilarious. Hui Shi, also known as Huizi, sort of gets partially pigeonholed in the Daoist category. Sima Tan, father to Sima Qian and co-writer of the Records of the Grand Historian, called him a prominent member of the School of Names, the Mingjia. These sophists, I told you about them in a previous episode. Deng Xi was one example. So these thinkers from the School of Names were so despised by the Ru school of philosophers. Huizi is mentioned several times in not only the Zhuangzi, but the Xunzi and others as well. Sima Tan said of the School of Names, quote, They conducted minute examinations of trifling points and complicated and elaborate statements, which made it impossible for others to refute their ideas. End quote. The School of Names was the philosophy that wanted to explore what lies beyond shapes and features. And for this, they made contributions to early Daoist thought. They were the first to discover the concept of what lies beyond shapes and features, as opposed to that which lies within shapes and features, things that can be named, what most people are familiar with, the concrete versus the abstract. The universal lies beyond shapes and features and is abstract, unnameable. The Dao is nameless. That's why it's so hard to describe. The Zhuangzi, from a Chinese translation point of view, is not an easy nut to crack. It's filled with all kinds of fanciful words and has all kinds of fun with Chinese characters, which are the stuff of double entendres and playful meanings that are sometimes impossible to translate with certainty. Like any literature, it's really not the same when you're reading it in translation. So many subtleties of Chinese characters are impossible to put into the words of another language. It's both literature and philosophy all at the same time. It's written in the form of short stories, dialogues, and verse, with most of the stories featuring Zhuangzi himself. Let's just look at some of the passages of the Zhuangzi. I'll read 2 or 3, and if you never read it before, you'll get it. I guess perhaps the most famous passage is in the outer chapters, chapter 14 to be exact. This concerns a dream that Zhuangzi had. This is like his signature passage from the Zhuangzi that you'll read most often. It went like this, quote, Formerly I, Zhuangzhou, dreamt that I was a butterfly flying about, feeling that it was enjoying itself. I did not know that it was Zhou. Suddenly I awoke and was myself again, the veritable Zhou. I did not know whether it had formerly been Zhou dreaming that he was a butterfly, or it was now a butterfly dreaming that it was Zhou. But between Zhou and a butterfly there must be a difference. This is a case of what is called the transformation of things. End quote. This sort of gives you a little taste of Zhuangzi. His writing is sometimes irreverent, but almost always skeptical, believing nothing and questioning every kind of accepted belief about life, death, good and bad. It's filled with fables and stories that stimulate your mind to rethink some things and laugh at some of the reasoning behind accepted beliefs. It attempts to answer questions that are both philosophical and intellectual. Here's a couple passages from the Zhuangzi that gives you an idea how he keeps pounding home the message. Don't be so sure what you know is right. Quote, Consider cripple Shu. His chin is down by his navel. His shoulders stick up above his head. The bones at the base of his neck point to the sky. The 5 pipes of his spine are on top. His 2 thighs form ribs. Yet by sewing and washing, he's able to fill his mouth. By shaking the fortune-telling sticks, he earns enough to feed 10. When the authorities draft soldiers, a cripple can walk among them confidently, flapping his sleeves. When they are conscripting work gangs, cripples are excused because of their infirmity. When the authorities give relief grain to the ailing, a cripple gets 3 measures along with bundles of firewood. Thus, one whose form is crippled can nurture his body and live out the years heaven grants him. Think what he could do if his virtue was crippled too." End quote. Now, this especially has poignancy when you look at it in the context of the times. In most modernized societies where there is some semblance of stable government, last time I checked, no one had to be worried they'd be picked off the street or from their homes to go build a great wall somewhere or dig ditches, build dikes, or work on some egomaniac's tomb or go fight a war somewhere unpleasant. But in those days, that was a real everyday concern among the populace. If you were male, you could be irrigating a field, and the next day you're on the way to a battlefield to go face off against brutal killers from a nearby state. Another one goes like this, quote, "Root of heaven roamed on the south side of Mount Vast. When he came to the banks of Clare Stream, he met nameless man and asked him, 'Please tell me how to manage the world.' 'Go away, you dunce,' nameless man said. 'Such questions are no fun. I was just about to join the creator of things. If I get bored with that, I'll climb on the bird merges with the sky and soar beyond the 6 directions. I'll visit nothing whatsoever town and stay in boundless country. Why do you bring up managing the world to disturb my thoughts?' Still, Root of Heaven repeated his question, and nameless man responded, 'Let your mind wander among the insipid. Blend your energies with the featureless. Spontaneously accord with things, and you will have no room for selfishness. Then the world will be in order.' One more, and then we'll move on. When Zhuangzi was about to die, his disciples wanted to bury him in a well-appointed tomb. Zhuangzi said, 'I have the sky and the earth for inner and outer coffins, the sun and the moon for jade discs, the stars for pearls, and the 10,000 things for farewell gifts. Isn't the paraphernalia for my burial adequate without adding anything?' And then a disciple replied, 'Oh, we are afraid the crows and kites will eat you, master.' And then Zhuangzi answered, 'Above ground, I'll be eaten by crows and kites. Below ground, by ants. You're robbing from one to give to the other. Why play favorites?' He was quite a character, but despite his quirkiness, the government was always trying to recruit him. There's a part of the Shi that goes like this. When a couple officials from Luoyang came down on a recruiting mission to snag Zhuangzi, he snapped back at them, 'Go away quickly and do not soil me with your presence. I would rather amuse and enjoy myself in a filthy ditch than be subject to the rules and restrictions in the court of a sovereign.' Zhuangzi most definitely parted ways with Confucius and his contempt for government. Those sage kings, so loved and revered by Confucius, Zhuangzi said about them, 'The Golden Age, which preceded the earliest kings, had no government, and Yao and Shun, instead of being so honored by Confucius, should be charged with having destroyed the primitive happiness of mankind by introducing government. In the age of perfect virtue, men lived in common with birds and beasts, and were on terms of equality with all creatures, as forming one family. How could they know among themselves the distinctions of superior men and small men?' Daoism as a philosophic thought and as a religion by the Han Dynasty gave rise to a whole number of Daoist sects that appeared on the scene, all having the name the Way of something or other. Way of the this, Way of the that. Way means Dao, so it was always something or other Dao. Also around the Han, that was when the Fangshi business really took off. Fangshis were these Daoist practitioners of alchemy, astrology, divination, feng shui, necromancy, and all the different manners of magic and numerology. If you need to exorcise a ghost, call your local feng shui. These guys are still around today, offering their services as feng shui masters and whatnot, and practitioners of the ancient arts. Confucianism wasn't the only thing that had a splendiferous time under Emperor Wu of Han. Daoism, too, and these Fangshis, they too really had it quite good. Han Wu Di, Emperor Wu of Han, patronized them like crazy and was a generous sponsor to promote the study and compilation of Daoist teachings. A lot of the practices of some of these Fangshis were absorbed into some of these different Daoist sects. So it's during the Han, the Western Han, 206 BC to 8 AD, where these Fangshis first began to appear with greater frequency than before. And these Daoist practices and also bits and pieces of the I Ching commingled with many of these ancient folk rituals that went back as far as the Zhou and even the Shang. So Daoism by the Han Dynasty, especially after Sima Tan named it the Daoist school, had taken on a shape that was much more approachable to the people. By the end of the Han Dynasty, it'll get juiced up with all kinds of traditions, beliefs, and gods of every kind imaginable. And then Zhang Daoling will come around in 142 CE during the period of the Eastern Han, and Daoism will become a full-fledged religion competing with the best of them. And during the Eastern Han, Laozi will be given divine status for the first time by the emperor. So, imagine the possibilities. Also, towards the latter part of the Han, you had the appearance of what is called Neo-Daoism. Neo-Daoism is also called Xuanxue. Pleco, the #1 app for Chinese English translations, calls Xuanxue Dark Learning, a mystical school developed in the 3rd and 4th centuries, characterized by metaphysical speculations seeking to adapt Daoist theories to a Confucian milieu. These Xuanxue thinkers, Wang Bi, we mentioned him, Guo Xiang, Xiang Xiu, and others as well, took the 2 holy books of Daoism, the Laozi and the Zhuangzi, and explained them in a different way. And this interpretation of the 2 books, at that time at least, made perfect sense. And these 2, Guo Xiang and Xiang Xiu, they were equally adept at using their understanding of these works to tweak them in very subtle ways so that it would become recognizable and relatable to any Confucian. It was Guo Xiang, by the way, who's given credit for determining the order for the chapters of the Zhuangzi. These Xuanxue scholars of this mystical dark school took all that Daoism and Confucianism and didn't so much bring it to a new level as much as they led it down a different path. These Guo Xiang and Wang Bi commentaries on the Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi made Daoism current and in tune with the latest sophistication and philosophic thought that was achieved by the end of the Eastern Han. It's worth noting that as all these Xuanxue-minded scholars and their dark, mysterious, mystical ways began thriving at the very same time that Daoism the religion was ramping up, Zhang Daoling had passed in 156, and all his disciples had had plenty of time to get the word out about this new but familiar religion that also used the accepted Daoist canon and the almighty I Ching and a whole host of gods and spirits. That was the easiest sell imaginable. In general, these Xuanxue or Neo-Daoist scholars share in common an effort to reinterpret aspects of Confucianism in ways to make it more compatible with Daoism. Wang Bi and Guo Xiang were the biggest names in this so-called Neo-Daoism. Guo Xiang's commentary on the Zhuangzi is called as great an achievement as the actual book itself. Not only did Guo Xiang offer the most respected commentary on what Zhuangzi wrote, he also added some of his own interpretations. Like Confucianism and Buddhism too, what was originally received from the most ancient sources continued to evolve. And every once in a while, some commentary on the work would come along and offer some new insight that made complete sense. I haven't said too much, if anything, about Buddhism. I said at the outset I was going to try and not get bogged down in that topic, but it's important to know the Buddhist religion and the philosophy that the religion spawned was also changing and evolving. And as we finish off the Han Dynasty, we can see that these big 3, Confucianism, Daoism, Buddhism, they will start to commingle, find commonalities, and start having some overlap. And this will open up entire new vistas that Confucius, Laozi, or Zhuangzi never could have imagined in their lifetimes. We'll look at this in more detail later, especially when we look at Neo-Confucianism. The political animals among the Daoist crowd would, from time to time, throughout Chinese imperial history, be favored by the occasional emperor or empress. For example, we'll see during the Tang Dynasty, Daoism really struck gold, and during the great Emperor Xuanzong's time, it even became the official state religion of China. The great Xuanzong Emperor, who reigned during a golden age in the Tang Dynasty, he was a very big-time Daoist. He did for Daoism what Dong Zhongshu did for Confucianism. During his reign, Xuanzong ordered all of the various Daoist sects and movements to be combined under a single Daoist umbrella. This was in the 8th century. And even at the earliest moment when the Tang was being founded, the founder, Li Yuan, in order to puff himself up and add additional gravitas to his legitimacy, claimed he was a descendant of Laozi. Remember, they both had that Li surname. The Empress Wu Zetian, she was the only exception to the Tang rulers. She was a devout Buddhist and embraced Buddhism over Daoism. Other than the period where she held power, the Tang Dynasty belonged to the Daoists as far as who held the most sway at the Tang imperial court in Chang'an. It was around 400 CE or thereabouts that the first Daozang was compiled. The Daozang, this was a collection, an official collection of everything there was that was ever written or had something to do with Daoism. The first time they did this, there were about 1,200 scrolls of Daoist wisdom, including, of course, the Laozi, Zhuangzi, and Liezi, too, which is also sort of, but not really considered a Daoist text. When Daoism was enjoying its heyday under Xuanzong during the Tang, for a second time in 748, a new official Daozang was compiled. Then in 1016, during the Song Dynasty, the third Daozang came out, which improved on the second and culled it of many texts found out of step with the times or commentaries from thinkers playing too loose and fast with the words of the ancients. And then in 1444, during the Ming Dynasty, they have the last version, and by then there's almost 5,000 scrolls that make up this final version of Daoism's most sacred and important texts. Okay, I know I didn't dump a lot of actual Daoist thought and analysis on you. I'm trying to focus more on the history. I hope that you got the main idea. We'll be coming back to Daoist philosophy in the coming episodes. Might I interest you in coming back next time? There's this new thing called Buddhism that is going to come along and shake things up a little in China. That all starts next episode. Until then, this is Laszlo Montgomery signing off this time from Santa Monica, but I bet you couldn't tell the difference. Please think about coming back again next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.
If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.